Welcome, everybody, to the Takeaways edition of the Vegas Nation podcast. It's your host here, Heidi Fang, and I'm joined today with CBS sports reporter Logan Reever joining me here to talk all about the Raiders, what could be happening here in the offseason. Of course, Logan, first, before I bring you on here, I got to thank our sponsors, Station Casino. We are brought to you by STN Sports. Download that mobile app today. Also, we are presented to you on Blue Wire Podcast and Liquid Death. Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to join me today.
Yeah, no, I got to get half as many sponsors to possibly back me up as that. That was impressive. And you memorized all those?
You did. And like you're in your car right now. So I think you could use one of those refreshing liquid deaths. They're like looking like a tall boy though. So I don't want you getting pulled over.
Maybe like a full gallon size just to get me.
They actually come in 22-ounce cans.
Wow, it's impressive. No, I'll have to take you up on
Multiple
that.
flavors. There's
Yep,
lime. It's refreshing. It's very crisp. I like that
I
one.
love one huge ad. I'm all about it.
Well, thank you for joining me for this.
Of course.
I'll talk to you soon. No, I'm kidding. So Logan, I'm happy to have you on today to talk about the Raiders. Like I said, a lot's going on, even though we thought it'd be maybe vacation time for a lot of us, right? But not so much because the ongoing quarterback saga, it continues to brew with the Raiders, starting off with Derek Carr being benched the last couple of games. Stidham comes in. Then you hear the talk, Brady's coming. Brady retires. Now we're hearing maybe Garoppolo, maybe Aaron Rodgers. I wanted to get your take on what you think could be happening at quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we've been talking about this for a little while, you and I, and just kind of the whole community. And I'm sticking by my guns at this exact moment. And that would be Jimmy G is my leader in the clubhouse for what they do going forward. And it's actually funny because the more weeks go by, I mean, obviously the Rogers stuff has picked up more traction because you see kind of the bromance between him and Devontae on Twitter, and then obviously the stuff over at Pebble Beach this weekend. So they play into it a little bit. It has obviously some of those similar vibes to maybe not as outward as what Brett Favre did towards the end of his time with the Packers, but that level of drama, I think I think Aaron doesn't mind it sometimes. I think that he likes to be part of the conversation and kind of the will he, won't he sort of, mindset behind it, which is interesting and it's great for us. So I'm not mad at it by any means. The thing that I go back to with in regards to Aaron is that even though it would be a fit, I mean, it's going to be tough to not be a fit if you're one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game. But in terms of being a fit roster wise for what this team needs so desperately, and that is beyond just a quarterback. They have so many needs on the defensive side of the ball. And, there's other parts that would probably have to go out with a trade if you were to bring him in on top of the money that is, just is the biggest part of this conversation. But that alone, that move would dictate so much of what your off season would be, and it would hamper you in terms of trying to build a full on roster and squad to go along with that.
I
And so
think
you look at a lot of those teams that have sort of brought older quarterbacks in for those 1 or 2 seasons, and you see a lot of teams that are well rounded throughout the roster. And whether that be Tom Brady and the Bucks, who had a good defense the year that they won it all, or Matt Stafford heading to LA and then them winning it all, that is a full on loaded roster. And I think if you bring in Aaron Rodgers, there's still a bunch of needs that would still prevent you from being a Super Bowl winning team. So I think Jimmy G allows you to sort of fix some of those spots more and more. But the more we go on, the more I think the familiarity is a huge key with Jimmy G, and especially if he were to come here.
And of course, you take the risk, though, Jimmy G, of the injury concerns. But then I always think about with Rodgers, is it a concern with his age? Plus, he's going on one of his, what did the Crocodile Dundee call it? A walkabout. He's going on a walkabout,
Yeah.
and so he's taking some time, few 4 days that he said after the pro-am to kind of clear his mind and let the
Very zen. Yes.
yeah, that alpaca stuff he was that's a llama. But there's
Yes.
something else that he does that starts with the A that I can't quite say. Ashwanda? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Light some incense, like all of the stuff. He's very much gone the long hair now. It's all about the positive vibe. He won't stand for anything else. So he'll be
yeah,
probably somewhere in like a cabin in a forest trying to figure out his next couple of days and moves.
exactly how I picture him, letting the beard grow out, sans oil to have it perfectly coiffed, but that's okay. We're gonna think about what could happen there. But when you do, would you go injury? You're going injury over age, basically, because you're saying that with Jimmy G, you think he gives him the best chance. So not too concerned about the injuries there, Logan.
Yeah, no, I think that of course the injury should be a concern. I think that's at the forefront of anything. I mean, look at what San Francisco was this year. I mean, they almost went through 4 or 5 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So part of you can literally say at a certain degree, yeah, it's bad luck. These guys are getting hurt. But at what point do we go, hey, maybe the system is kind of leaving these guys out to dry, whether that be, longer run plays or longer action or the way that the schemes are actually called in this West Coast offense. I mean, that's uncanny to have that amount of injuries. I know Jimmy G had an injury history before that point, but what I go back to more than anything else is the familiarity. And sure, Aaron Rodgers is a guy that can probably get any system and he'll be fine in it and go along with it. I think that more and more, and something I was even thinking about last night was going back to Jimmy G in last season. Why did he sort of restructure his deal to stay with the 49ers in a spot where you knew that we were going to go with Trey Lance
Hmm.
and a guy that was in the NFC Championship game? And you go back to, well, Kyle Shanahan wasn't exactly treating him right, wasn't exactly very glowing about him the entire season before, and basically stayed away from the team for some of training camp. And everything was pointing towards Jimmy G not being on that roster. So why did he resign or stay in that situation? And the only answer you can come to is familiarity. That
Right.
means a lot to him. Even in a spot where he knew he wasn't going to be the starter going into the year, he still stayed along as opposed to trying to stick it to them and go somewhere else. And so it really makes you realize that that alone, that value is so huge with him. And I think it's very huge with Josh McDaniels because I think that not just knowing his system, but having a guy in it for a certain amount of time does wonders. You saw what Jarrett Stidham did at the end of the year. I know it's very limited action, but I can guarantee you do not get that type of outing if Jarrett Stidham is in that system for year one. And so it makes you wonder with Jimmy G, with a guy who's had a win percentage over 70% in his career, those things translate. I understand that he's not the gunslinger of an Aaron Rodgers, and maybe it's not as sexy to watch in terms of just the actual product on the field. But if you're winning the games, that's all that matters. And Josh McDaniels at this point, with between going to Denver and not exactly having the ideal season that he wanted to have in year one with the Raiders, at the end of the day, you just want to win games. And wouldn't you want to bring in the guy that can win the games and is also younger to the point where maybe you can keep him for beyond 2 or 3 years and you draft a guy in this year's draft that can actually develop in a way where you have maybe a Patrick Mahomes where he's sitting for a year, or just kind of fine tune him enough where there's not that much pressure on these guys. So I think it makes sense from a lot of standpoints. And it's not anything close to a rebuilding stage, which I don't really know why fans keep using that term with this team. There's way too much talent and they're way too loaded to get to that point. So it's a nice stopgap, and I think it fills all of the needs of what you would look at this season.
I agree. I think that it is a good choice in terms of money as well, because he's not
Mhm.
going to command, I think, what Aaron Rodgers obviously has on
No.
paper that they would have to inherit. But when you think about Josh Jacobs needing to be re signed, I think it's essential to think about that contract as well. Though I imagine they might franchise tag him, there's still the possibility that maybe they are able to go beyond that and try to pay him a little bit bigger of a contract. I think that's what Josh wants. I think that they find some kind of happy medium there that they could work that out, and much
Yeah.
more room to do that with Jimmy G, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, no, and I think that so much of it too is part of it is the Josh Jacobs element, which is huge and you have to consider within itself. And obviously what running backs go for. And we've seen around the NFL, I think teams are a little bit more and more hesitant to give a running back that second contract
Mhm.
because if you look at just the tenure or the ways that it's gone for guys like Todd Gurley or Zeke Elliott. I'm not saying Josh Jacobs will be in that case, but I think teams are a little bit more fearful of giving that second contract to a running back. I honestly look more so towards the defensive side of the ball because one, this all starts with needing a good draft. That's why I don't want them to give away necessarily any picks because you don't necessarily need stars on the defensive side of the ball. You just need solidified starters. And to see this team and all of the first round draft picks that they have just gone to waste and are just not on this roster in recent years, like people don't realize that sets your franchise back in a lot of ways each time you do that by 2 or 3 years. And if you're
Yeah.
doing that at every single position, you're almost setting yourself back by a decade. So in a lot of ways, defensively, I truly do believe this that they are set back a decade's worth of time in terms of just having guys on this team who don't just know their role, but are just solidified NFL starters. And that doesn't necessarily mean hitting on superstars in the draft, but just draft solid players to fit your needs to go along with that. And when you do that, it allows for you to have the room to be like, hey, Jimmy, we can give you 15 million a year or 20 million a year because you have so many of these guys on these rookie deals. And that's why you looked at 3 of the final 4 teams had quarterbacks on contracts that were rookie contracts because they could afford to beef up all of the pieces around them. Would Jimmy G's contract be exactly that? Of course not. But it allows that more so flexibility to say we can bring in a defensive veteran or a guy that would maybe command top tier money or would go somewhere else and take more of a team friendly deal in this situation. So it opens more doors roster wise, whether that be Josh Jacobs or the defensive side of the ball. And I think that in this division, with the offenses not getting easier, you need to more so focus on defense than anything else too.
And I think the draft has a lot of guys that they could bring in, whether it's
No
defensive
doubt.
line or cornerback.
Mhm.
So perhaps if they don't make that trade, they're able to use some of the capital that they would have to give up to get
Yeah.
an Aaron Rodgers, like probably the first pick that they have at number 7. Granted, that was their plan to stay at 7, who knows? But as long as you have to think about Aaron Rodgers, you're still thinking about moving capital, and that could be just insane if you have to give up too much to Green Bay to get that in return, but to have Aaron Rodgers in return. But as we start to think about also just Derek Carr's future, he was in town for the Pro Bowl, and I wanted to
Yeah.
get your take on like what you thought about his skills competition, what you thought about just his presence, his candor during the event.
Yeah, I think it was you could tell it meant something to him, from that alone. I think that there was a little bit of an emotional element that we thought would be there a little bit more in terms of like we thought there would be this big hurrah of waving off to the fans and Raiders. And I understand it's the Pro Bowl; it's not the same as your final home game in front of the Raiders. But it didn't really seem like he seeked that. So I think going back to it, I thought that was the original inspiration behind accepting the invite was so he could have that moment.
Right.
Um, but him sort of deflecting away from that from an emotional standpoint, it makes you wonder if he was kind of over it the second that he wasn't back in the facility for the final 2 weeks of the season. I think that the passing competition was something within itself. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody get that passionate or competitive
He's
about
very,
something
very
where
fired
it was quite fiery and I feel like that in a lot of ways it's going to sound weird. That might have been his Super Bowl in terms of this season is that passing competition. And nothing against it. Hey, I mean, if we learned anything over the course of these Pro Bowl games, it's that these guys are ultra competitive, no matter what they do. And you even saw it in Peyton Manning coaching the AFC side and getting upset that the NFC side was taking a knee in the final couple
yeah.
seconds of the game. It really goes to show no matter how far removed these guys are from the game, that competitive spirit and fire will always be there. And I think that that's, obvious in a case like Derek Carr. And I think that this last couple of months here was obviously very trying on him. But we didn't get that like full on snapshot photo of the, teary-eyed sort of Carr, like waving goodbye by any means. So maybe he's detached himself a little bit more emotionally than we realize, and he's ready for that next chapter in his career more than we thought. But whenever you spend nearly a decade of time somewhere, it's going to take a toll on you. But it definitely left something to be desired this whole Pro Bowl weekend.
All right, a few more things for you here, Logan. First of all, the Super Bowl coming up. Obviously, they had a guy that they drafted in Jalen Hurts that has come up to be able to get a team and lead it to the Super Bowl, though he missed a few games there. But just what has been your thought when you look at a quarterback like him who really wasn't highly rated as a passer coming out of college, that was benched back for Tua, when you think about the championship game back when?
Yeah.
Um, how his journey has gone, and is this kind of a story that could happen for the Raiders if they should try to find a quarterback out of the draft? Although I know and I understand every situation is unique, but I'm wondering if it's something that Raider fans can look to, like, hey, look, Jalen Hurts did it with the Eagles. Maybe the Raiders have a goal too to find that same guy that can help build with the team as opposed to jumping for an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady or a Garoppolo, where you still have to go back to the, either free agent market in a few years or what have you.
Yeah, no, I think patience is reigns supreme, and I think that's something we get caught up in less and less in any facet, whether that's college, pro, and really any sport. We've become much more impatient than ever. I think half of it boils down to not just coaching, but I think drafting because if you look at when Philly took him in the second round of that draft, they were coming off Carson Wentz getting this massive contract. People didn't understand why they weren't using that pick on surrounding Carson Wentz with more weapons or, things to make him better or prop him up. And the lesson in that all should be, even if you think you have it figured out at the quarterback spot, you should always then take a quarterback, because even if he doesn't end up being the guy in a sense, you can either move him for draft capital, or you can have a similar situation with what the Packers did with Jordan Love, where you have to keep taking guys, not necessarily because they have to be the pillar of your franchise, but it's useful to have them. And then every once in a while, if you have good enough coaching, which we've seen with Nick Sirianni, and then good enough pieces around with adding AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, all of these guys, you can truly prop somebody up to grow into that role. So I think we put so much pressure on almost that like Andrew Luck syndrome, where the team around him was so terrible in Indianapolis when they drafted him, but yet he made the playoffs because he was just that good within his first year. And we expect these quarterbacks to overcome any obstacle that comes in their way and then lead the team to the promised land.
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts is really evidence that it does take a minute and you can make these guys better based on the pieces around them. So I think that the Eagles, in terms of relating it back to the Raiders, they're more so a model because, one, you have to be patient, and then two, you have to kind of use your draft capital and all of your picks and swapping them around, in a smarter way, because in a lot of ways, what Philly has done and Howie Roseman is you bring in a guy like Darius Slay and CJ, Gardner, and all of these guys, and Hassan Riddick. These are all
Yes.
guys that you're swapping basically for picks. And
Mhm.
I want to say that there was a stat between, the teams in the Super Bowl where out of the 44 main starters on the field, 26 of them, I believe it's 26, are homegrown for each side. And
Wow.
that's a huge deal. And for Philly, I think it's the only one that's not homegrown on their offensive side of the ball would be AJ Brown, who they just traded for. Everybody else on that team is homegrown, which goes to show we live in this time, especially the Raiders, where they're bringing in all these free agents. And what is the quick fix? At the end of the day, you just have to draft better sometimes. And when you don't draft, you have to use those picks in a much more efficient way and just smarter. So Philly's definitely the model from that standpoint. But if you're looking necessarily for your Jalen Hurts, he's always had. I like his mindset more than anything else. Especially you're referencing, what he was in college and Tua and that benching. I think in a lot of guys, their confidence would have been shot and they never would have gone back to the same person whatsoever. I think Jalen Hurts, from all of his comments and just the way that he conducts himself, is the kind of guy you want on your team from that standpoint, because he has a never ending belief in himself, but he doesn't do it so outwardly. It's very much within himself and just himself alone. And that's truly all you need in this. So does it have to be a Jalen Hurts carbon copy? That would be great. But truly giving somebody more than a year or two, because even last year in Philly, a lot of that fan base didn't think he was the guy.
Right.
And really, the course of the whole year, and they lost in that playoff game to Tampa Bay. And in a lot of ways, that was closure for some of their fans, being like, this guy is not enough. 1 year later, he's more than enough, and he's the dream. So it goes to show 1 year can truly change anything in the NFL. But have a little bit more patience past 1 or 2 seasons with some of these guys, especially when they show promise. And I think that there's guys on this Raiders roster who have showed promise, and you should stick with, even at that spot.
Are there guys that you think that had glimpses? Maybe let's just take this for example, Cleve Farrell, right? He hasn't panned out as a number 4 overall pick, but would you continue to invest in a player like him or move on?
Um, I very much going to kind of what I was saying of, you have so many different needs that you have to swap out on that defensive side of the ball. I
Yeah.
would personally move on,
Yeah.
just because I think that there's so many other things that you need to fill in that position. And I think that he's had more than enough opportunities to sort of prove it. And I think that's really what you can boil down to. And on the other side of the ball, it's, Jared Stidham had not had a lot of opportunities and kind of seized it within that few moments to sort of take advantage. I see it through the opposite end, where it's somebody like Clee. And I think that there's so many spots that this Raiders team needs to fill on the defensive side of the ball. So I would say moving on from that. And then so much of it is going to be dictated by Derek Carr's move and that money and what it goes down. Do they trade him? Do they end up cutting him? What are they on the hook for when it comes to that? So it's going to affect the entire roster, and it's going to affect every other NFL team's decisions as well. That is going to be the first quarterback domino to sort of move, and every team will move from that point on. But in terms of Clee and just that defensive side of the ball, they can do better. And that's just putting it frankly. So I think you very much move on.
Okay, last two. What would you do to change the Pro Bowl?
Oh gosh. Not play it? I don't know. That's probably that's probably what I would. No, there's no way that they
Uh,
don't play it because of the money that they bring in. I don't know if there's any fixing the Pro Bowl because these at a certain point, I was even thinking about it the other. Why don't we just have them play different sports besides football? Why don't we just have them go to that point? Something where you're not even playing the sport that you're necessarily. I found myself the only one that I was really interested in event wise was the golf. And that was because you kind of just wanted to see everyone's so obsessed with everybody else's golf game. So they wanted to see if they, were decent at a sort of a long drive. And that was really the only one I found myself sitting down to be interested in because these guys are such natural athletes that you wonder if it translates to other sports. So my fix for the Pro Bowl, I guess, is not play football, play a completely different other sport.
Great.
But I've been pretty checked out on the Pro Bowl emotionally for a couple of years now. And
Uh,
I mean, Josh Jacobs said it pretty well. I won't repeat what he said,
no, we
but I
can't.
think that I think I think a lot of guys feel the same way. So, but it's not going anywhere because the league makes money from it, and you know
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, who is your pick in the Super Bowl?
that. Oh man, it's really tough because I don't know if I can watch another second of those reaction videos from Brittany Mahomes or Jackson Mahomes. Just
Mhm.
I think that it's truly led me to such a dark place when I watch some of those high pitched screams. So I think I have to cheer against it at this point. But then I have so many friends who are from Philly and just will be texting me immediately to rub it in my face. So either way, I don't win. Either way, I have to hear somebody screaming, and it's gonna probably make me nauseous. But if I had to pick from a football standpoint, um, I would say pulling for the Eagles in this game, but I see Kansas City winning this game. I do. I think Mahomes gets enough time with that ankle to get it right. And I think Philly's had a relatively easy road to get to the Super Bowl and hasn't really been tested over the course of the year. I think they're a great team. Don't get me wrong. But whenever you have Daniel Jones at home and then you're going up against what Josh Johnson
Yeah.
and like a team that basically didn't have a quarterback at the end in the NFC Championship game, Kansas City is a whole different monster. And I also think that the AFC was so loaded this year that our perspective of winning the games, I think Kansas City Super Bowl was the week before with Cincinnati. I think that that was sort of the Super Bowl in a sense. So I can see Kansas City winning this game, honestly, by double digits.
Okay. There you have it from Logan Reever with CBS here in Las Vegas. Thank you so much for coming on. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
I try to just keep it to my name. I don't have a cool catchphrase or slogan or anything like that. It is just at Logan Reever.
No
R
slogan,
E.
Logan.
No, it's not. I had some weird ones before that point, but those will not be shared because my high
Okay,
school friends will roast me for them. But
fair enough.
just Logan Reaver is all we got for now until I find a cool bone in my body.
Awesome. I think this was a very cool interview. Thank you. And also the scenery going on in the background with people coming up, looking in, going, is he got Chipotle in there? Amazing. So thank you so much for the
Good.
time, Logan. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
And for everybody else out there, make sure to check out vegasnation.com for all of your up to date Raiders news. Thank you, everyone else, so much for tuning in.